Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of An American in Thailand, airing every Friday. This program is broadcast to you from Ratchamakan University of Technology, Peranakan, and I will be bringing this program to you in two parts. For the first part, I will introduce a certain topic about being an American living here in Thailand. Could be about food, travel, culture, anything specific to Thailand, anything. And we will then take a break, and in the second part of the program, we'll get into a little bit more examples, a little more specifics about what we're talking about. All right, let's get to the show. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gary Gray, and I am your host for An American in Thailand. I, of course, am an American, and I have been here in Thailand for a little over 8 years. Now, some people get upset when people from the United States call themselves Americans because the whole continent is North America, and then there's also South America, so everyone is American. Just so you know, I don't mean to offend anyone. The name of our country is the United States of America, so we sometimes shorten it to America. Sometimes we shorten it to United States. So when I say American, it's just short for United States of America. All right. So this week on our program, we're going to talk about something a little bit different because I guess it's not really food, travel, or culture. It's about the weather here in Thailand. Now, we've talked about the weather before, but this is a topic I wanted to talk about for two reasons. First reason is it's the right time of year. As I record this program, it is around the middle of August, and around the world, I will tell you the topic in just a moment, but around the world, the entire world right now, this is close to the peak time of year for this type of weather. So it's a good time to talk about it. The other reason I want to talk about it is because there's a lot of bad information on the internet about this. Even AI, which you would think a topic like the weather, it's science, this is something AI should be able to get right pretty easily. We hear, because AI is still a little bit kind of newish, you do hear a lot about stuff it does that's wrong. For example, there's a lot of research that people do, and they're trying to get AI to help them with their write their research paper. And AI will literally make up other research papers to reference in your research, which is unbelievable that it will do that. We just had a big scandal about that. Well, not a big scandal, but a little scandal about that in America with our health agency. They put out this report about, I forget what it was about. I think it might have been about vaccines. They put out this report about vaccines, and it was referencing all of these other reports. And most of the things that we're referencing didn't even exist. It was done by AI, and AI was just making up references. So AI can sometimes be pretty bad. But generally, a scientific idea behind something, it should get that right. It should get that right. And in this case, it does not. I know because I looked it up. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it here. I wanted to tell you the real reason. Back in America, before I became a teacher here in Thailand, back in America, I was actually a weather scientist. So I'm very familiar with this. And we're going to talk about this as it relates to Thailand. And it is something interesting that I observed when I moved here, having been from America. Something I observed here. Okay, so what in the world are we actually going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about why there are no tropical cyclones in Thailand. Now, first of all, you may disagree. You may say, well, wait a minute. I remember we had this one or this storm or that storm. Earlier this year, there was just one they were talking about going into northern Thailand. No, the media really overstates what's happening. That's really just the leftovers, what we call remnants. That's just the leftovers of a storm. That's a dying system because once they hit land, they start to weaken. So those are almost always from storms that hit Vietnam. There's a lot of flooding in northern Thailand. Was it late last year or just earlier this year? That was from a storm that moved into China and dropped a lot of rain into the Mekong River, so the Mekong River flooded because the Mekong River actually starts all the way up in China. But again, that was a dead storm. Dead? Produced all that rain? Yes. As they're dying, they can actually produce more rain. You think about the clouds hold all that moisture. So as the storm dies, the clouds collapse and all the water comes out. So they can actually rain more when they are weaker. So really, we don't get very many tropical cyclones here in Thailand. The media just overstates it. As you'll see in the second part of the program, we actually do sometimes get some here. We will talk about that. But generally, we do not get tropical cyclones here. Now, the question is, why? And this is where AI gets it wrong. Because I have seen this. I have looked this up. And the explanation AI will give you is totally, 100%, completely wrong. And what it will tell you is that the Coriolis effect is not strong enough at the latitude of Thailand. What in the world does that mean? What is the Coriolis effect? Okay. It's the effect on the air of the Earth spinning. And the Earth spinning, if you think about how it spins, it's going to spin faster at the equator than it does further north, right? Because the equator, that's where it's wide. And obviously the whole Earth is going to make one circle at the same time. Otherwise the whole Earth would be twisted. So, but it has to move faster because it's making a bigger circle at the equator than way up north or way down south. And we'll talk about way up north because Bangkok and Thailand are north of the equator. And so, and the air isn't really attached to the Earth, right? Because it's air. It's not attached to the Earth. But because of gravity, it kind of sort of is. The Earth pulls it down towards it. So it's sort of connected. So if you move faster at the equator than you do up north, think about which way that's going to cause the air to turn. And that's going to be counterclockwise. So as a storm forms, it's going to want to move, it's going to want to spin counterclockwise. Well, the closer you get to the equator, the weaker that force is. Because, right, if you go across the equator and you go to the south, if you think about it, if you think about what's going on there, the force will be in the other direction. A storm will spin clockwise south of the equator. So obviously, as you get closer and closer to the equator, that force weakens. And so if you're really close to the equator, there's not enough spin to get a storm going. Because the storms are always spinning, right? You see the picture you see the picture of the clouds on the news sometimes, and they're spinning really fast. So if you're too close to the equator, you cannot get a storm. Can't do it. Cannot form. No spin. No Coriolis force. There's no spin. And so this is what AI tells you the problem is. AI is totally wrong. Bangkok is at 13.8 degrees north. That is plenty far enough north. Plenty far enough north. Anywhere north of about 5 degrees is far enough north. Now, 5 to 10, a little hard maybe to get something going, but you can. North of 10, easily. So there's plenty of Coriolis force, effect, not force. We don't call that a force. There's plenty of Coriolis effect at most of Thailand's latitude. You get down to far southern Thailand, that's where it kind of gets in that 5 to 10 degree range. It gets a little bit weak down there, down near Malaysia and that area. But even there, still possible. So what is the problem? Why don't we get storms here? The biggest problem is simple. It's geography. Most storms are going to move from east to west. So our storms here are going to come from the Pacific, not the Indian Ocean. Now, we do have some that have come from the Indian Ocean. Sometimes they'll move in the wrong direction. As I said, in the second part of our program, we'll talk about some times where we actually have had a storm here. So they can move from the Indian Ocean, but that's not the normal direction they move in. So that's very uncommon. Very uncommon. So usually they would come from the Pacific. Well, it's really hard to get to Thailand from the Pacific. Because if these storms are moving relatively straight, from east to west, you've got Vietnam and Cambodia in the way. And that's why we don't get storms here. That's why we don't get tropical storms here. You would need to have basically a perfect path. You would need a perfect path where it comes south far enough to come south of Vietnam and Cambodia, and then it turns north or northwest, whatever, something like that, as it's getting into the Gulf of Thailand. And as I mentioned before, if you're going south of Vietnam and Cambodia, you're also going to be really far south then. It's hard to even get a storm to form. You can. One of the examples I'm going to tell you about in the second part of our program is a storm that did exactly that. But it's really hard. So it's hard to even get a storm. And then you would need it to turn a little bit to the north. Otherwise, it's just going to go into Malaysia. You need it to turn a little bit to the north as it reaches the Gulf of Thailand. So it needs to turn at just the perfect time. The Gulf of Thailand is not that wide. The only other way you're going to do it is if you can get a storm to actually form in the Gulf of Thailand, which is also very hard to do because it's not that big. And storms are usually not just sitting in one place when they form. Once again, it can happen. One of the examples on the list in the second half of our program will be one of those. But very rare. Okay, so why am I interested about in this, being an American in Thailand? Why is this interesting to me? It's not just because I am a weather scientist back in the U.S. When I was there, I was a weather scientist. It's also because you move to an area like Thailand, and you might think that tropical cyclones should be fairly common here. It's a tropical area. Very hot. If you know a little bit about the weather and that whole Coriolis effect thing that I talked about, you would know that indeed we are north far enough. Unlike what AI says. So we're north far enough. We got lots of water around us. Not so much to our east because, again, Vietnam and Cambodia in the way. But you got the Gulf of Thailand to the south. You got the Indian Ocean to the west. It just seems like it would be natural for us to get lots of tropical cyclones here. Just like it is in America. They get lots there. They've had, I think only one so far that has made landfall, but it's actually been a fairly slow year compared to normal there. There's actually been quite a number of storms, so they are up to their fifth storm already in the Atlantic Ocean. I say already, that's still not that many, but their season kind of peaks from between now through September, so it is still a little early in the Atlantic. They're on their fifth storm right now, and that storm is also going to miss the U.S., so they don't get a ton, but usually every year they get one or two, maybe even three sometimes. So they usually get a storm that hits every year. Now, of course, the United States is a bigger target as well. It's a much bigger country. Still, you would think here in Thailand they'd be fairly common. Philippines gets them all the time. Vietnam gets them all the time. Yeah, the problem is they have an open ocean on their east side. And again, these storms are usually moving from east to west. So they can get hit. And Thailand has no water to their east. We have water to our south and water to our west. So that is the main reason. All right. So the main reason, again, is Vietnam and Cambodia. They are in the way. They are protecting Thailand from tropical cyclones. All right, but when we get back for our second part of our program, well, we're going to talk about some exceptions. I want you to understand that it is possible, because a couple of these have been very bad storms here in Thailand. So I do want to talk about those. All right, so we will come back in just a moment, and let's take a quick break. Welcome back to our An American in Thailand program. So what we're talking about today is tropical cyclones in Thailand. And as I explained in the first part of the program, why is this? What does this have to do with an American being in Thailand? Well, I think most Americans, along with most people from the West, not just Americans, but I think most Westerners would kind of think that tropical cyclones here in Thailand would be fairly common. Lots of water around, lots of beaches. Thailand is known for its beaches. It's hot, tropical area. Got to be lots of tropical cyclones. But yet, they almost never happen. Almost. For this second part of the program, we're going to talk about a few times where there have been tropical cyclones here in Thailand. Most of the times, the worst effects are just going to be the rain, because usually the storms we get here are not very strong. Could they be? The easiest way to get a really strong one in Thailand would be if you're down near Phuket and you get a storm which is kind of moving in the wrong direction out of the Indian Ocean. And it has happened before. It is not common. It has happened. You can get storms moving in the wrong direction. We see it in the first part of the program, I talked about the Atlantic Ocean and effects on the U.S. We see it there sometimes too, especially if you get late in the season. Late in the hurricane season, we actually have a season where hurricanes are kind of normal in the Atlantic. The Pacific stays so warm, the Indian Ocean stays so warm, that you can really get them any time of year. They are certainly more common from, say, May to November, but you could kind of get them any time of year here in the Indian and Western Pacific. So you can get a really strong one, but it would probably be one that's hitting near, coming out of the Indian Ocean, not the Pacific. Excuse me. A Pacific one would have to come south of Vietnam and Cambodia. It's probably not going to be terribly strong because of the weakness of the Coriolis effect that far south. And then you'd also, as I explained in the first half of the program, you'd need it to turn at exactly the right time. If it just kept moving straight west from there, it's going to run into Malaysia. Now, of course, if the storm is wide enough, you're still going to get some effects from it down in southern Thailand, but you're not actually going to get it to hit southern Thailand. So let's talk about a few of these examples where we have actually had a tropical cyclone in Thailand. Maybe the most famous one is from 1989. It's famous for many reasons. First of all, most of these other ones were tropical storms. This one was a typhoon. Now you may say, well, what's the difference? They're all tropical cyclones. Yes, but we use the term tropical storm for weaker ones. A typhoon is a stronger one. Now, this wasn't an intense typhoon, but it was a typhoon, which means it's a stronger one. Winds that are much stronger. That's usually how we rate them, is by the wind speed. Even though the wind doesn't cause the most damage, that's usually how we classify them. So this was a stronger storm. That's one thing that made it kind of a big deal. In fact, the name of the storm was Typhoon Gay, 1989, and it was the first typhoon. Again, there have been other tropical storms. We're going to talk about one in just a moment. That was before Gay. But this was the first typhoon since 1891. So it had been almost 100 years since Thailand had seen a typhoon. But again, they did see one in 1891. So again, it is possible. It's not very common, but it is possible. Another reason it was kind of amazing is it is one of these few ones that actually formed in the Gulf of Thailand. Formed in the Gulf of Thailand and then moved northwest, I believe it was. I don't have a map sitting in front of me of the track. I believe it was northwest. So it moved up towards the area around Phuket, that area. And the third reason it was so amazing, in a bad way, is because it was terrible. It was terrible. There were 38,000 homes destroyed. Over 600 people died. And the damage was estimated at 11 billion baht. That's a lot. I think more people died in the tsunami. So this wasn't as bad as that. But this is still pretty bad. 600 people died. More than 600. Pretty bad. And that was in 1989. There was also one in 1962 called Tropical Storm Harriet. Now, this one was just a tropical storm. Like I said, the last typhoon before Typhoon Gay in 1989 was in 1891. So this one was just a tropical storm. Still, as I mentioned, they can do a lot of damage. And in fact, this one actually killed more people than Typhoon Gay did. This one killed 935 people, which is the deadliest tropical cyclone in Thailand since 1950. Now, in the records I looked up, I don't know why it says since 1950. Maybe there was a worse one in 1950. I don't know. It's not listed on here among the top events that have hit Thailand, but it just says the worst one since 1950. Yeah, that was Tropical Storm Harriet. And this is one of those ones that did what I said earlier about sneaking just south of Vietnam and Cambodia. And then it did turn northwest as it entered the Gulf of Thailand. And it hit almost the same area that Typhoon Gay hit, actually. It hit like around Phuket, that kind of stretch of coastline there. that area. It might have been a little further south, but that kind of area. The kind of western side of Thailand over there. Okay, so that was Harriet in 1962. And then there was one in fairly recently, in 2019. Now, we could debate this one because it was actually down to a tropical depression before hitting Thailand. Now, a tropical depression is even weaker. So this is not even technically a storm anymore. So you could say that maybe this one doesn't count. It was a storm, so it did have a name. It was Tropical Storm Pabuk. So you could argue that maybe this one doesn't count. But it did hit directly. It wasn't a depression. It didn't weaken because it was over land. In other words, it didn't come across Vietnam and Cambodia, and it was down to a depression when it entered Thailand. No. It was a direct hit. It was just that it was weak. It was just a tropical depression. And it mainly hit the southern part of the country and caused quite a lot of flooding. There was also some wind, but obviously with a weaker storm, the wind damage isn't going to be that bad. But there are some buildings, especially some older ones, and especially in some poorer neighborhoods, that can't withstand much wind. So there was enough wind to cause some damage, but probably most of it was due to flooding. And again, that was in 2019. There was also actually 2 tropical depressions that hit in 1983, Herbert and Kim. There was also a storm in 1986, which was a tropical depression which formed in the Andaman Sea. So that one's interesting because that one is one of those ones that was moving in the wrong direction out of the Indian Ocean. And a lot of these mostly affected southern parts of Thailand. A little harder to get up to the north part because, of course, there's now land on both sides, right? Because you got Myanmar on the west side. This one actually did manage to get up and cause flooding in Bangkok. So it came up far enough north. Now, the direct hit wouldn't have been on Bangkok, of course, because you have to cross that western part of Thailand first. So that would have been probably around Phuket again, that same area. Probably entered around there, and then came up, was moving northeast, and came over Bangkok and caused flooding there. So again, this is, on this list, I've got a list of 6 here, which have occurred since the 1960s. All right, so that's about 60 years. 6 of them, they do happen. That's once every 10 years. Now, half of them, admittedly, more than half actually, are only tropical depressions. They're pretty weak. But there's one every 10 years. The last one was about 6 years ago. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you're going to get one in 4 years. Could happen this year. Might not happen for another 20 years. After all, you had 2 of them in 1 year, in 1983. So, who knows when the next one will be. But my point is, they're not that uncommon. They're not that uncommon. And when they do happen, they can be really bad because they can bring a lot of rain. And flooding is always a big issue here in Thailand. And they can bring a ton of rain, even the weak ones, even if they're just really weak. As I explained before, the whole way the process works, sometimes the weaker ones can be worse. Weaker ones a lot of times might move slower as well. Not all the time. Not all the time. Sometimes weak ones move really fast. Sometimes big, strong ones move really slowly. But just because of the way the atmosphere works and how a storm gets steered, it's more common for a weaker one to move more slowly because they tend to be steered by lower level wind. And upper level wind tends to be stronger. So if it's a bigger storm, it's deeper and it gets steered. If it's a stronger storm, it tends to be deeper, gets steered by that upper level wind, so it's going to move faster. Usually. Again, not always, but usually. So that's another reason why the weaker storms can be worse for the rain, because the system might just sit there. Now, if it's sitting over land, eventually it's going to die out because tropical systems will die out over land. But it could be there for 2, 3, 4 days and just rain without moving. So they can cause a lot of trouble. even if they're weak. So again, about once every 10 years, we seem to get a tropical cyclone here. We almost had one I think it was just last year. It was last year or the year before. It was predicted at one point to come into Thailand, but then the track shifted a little bit more north, and it was one of these crazy tracks coming the wrong way out of the Indian Ocean. But the track shifted a little bit more to the north, and it came in kind of near Bangladesh, Myanmar, that area. So it came in a little closer to there, rather than a little bit further east down the coast towards Thailand. So we did not get that one. We didn't really even get much rain from it. A little bit of the rain kind of clipped up towards Chiang Mai area as it was moving inland and dying. But there wasn't, not too much. So we didn't even get much impact from that at all in Thailand. But again, at one point it was actually forecast to hit Thailand. So, why do we even talk about this? First of all, I think it's interesting. Second of all, I think a lot of Thai people don't realize that we can get these storms. And if you do think we get these storms, it's usually because, as I mentioned in the first half of the program, you're listening to the media when they say, oh, this typhoon is coming into us, this typhoon's coming into us. And all they're talking about is really just the leftovers of a typhoon from the Pacific that hit Vietnam. Those aren't going to be hurricanes, tropical storms, and probably not even tropical depressions by the time they get here, because they have to track all the way across Vietnam. Okay, that's not too much. Vietnam is very narrow. But then all the way across Cambodia before they ever get here. So, yeah, those don't really count. I mean, they count in terms of, yeah, they can make it rain a lot, possibly, if enough of it is left over by the time it gets here. Sure, can cause a lot of rain. But as far as being an actual tropical cyclone hitting Thailand, those don't count. And so if you don't include those, which the media does like to talk about a lot, then you might think we never get tropical cyclones here. So I think it's good for you to know that we do. And so if one day you're watching the news and they tell you that a tropical cyclone is coming, you should pay attention. And because sometimes it's this very media on the news that's giving you the bad information about ones that are coming across Vietnam and Cambodia, you should pay attention to where that storm is coming from. If you see that storm, if they show you on a map that storm is coming from the Indian Ocean, okay, that's real. Or if you see that it's coming up out of the Gulf of Thailand, very uncommon, but again, it does happen. There's been a couple of examples like that here. So it does happen. So if you see that it's coming up out of the Gulf of Thailand, then that's a real one. So you should look at the map, see where it's coming from, pay attention. So if you hear that there's going to be a storm coming like that, pay attention to when they show it on the map. Where is it coming from? Indian Ocean, Gulf of Thailand. It could actually be a very real tropical cyclone coming. If it's coming from the Pacific across Vietnam and Cambodia, it could give us a lot of rain, maybe. Depends how fast it's moving, things like that. Could, maybe, maybe not. But it's not an actual tropical cyclone hitting. Okay, so that's your story about tropical cyclones here in Thailand. And again, we talked about this from an American perspective because they're much more common in America. And it's that time of year as I'm recording this. All right, so thank you for joining us today for our An American in Thailand program. Let me reach out to any young people out there and ask them to consider our university here at Ratchamakan, University of Technology, Peranakan. All right, please stay with us and tune back in next week for another interesting episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.